is at stake in this trip is, are you using your money to show how valuable the gospel is? You wonder, have you ever wondered, why do we take up an offering in the middle of a worship service? That's not an accident. This is not tradition for me. I'd be happy to put a box at the back if I thought that would do it better. An offering in the middle of the service gives you a chance, Sunday after Sunday, with a check or a dime in your hand to say, I love the gospel more than a new CD. I love the gospel more than eating out. I love the gospel more than new carpet. I love the gospel more than a new car. I love the spread of the gospel. That's what this means, Jesus. That's worship. That's worship. And that's what they were doing everywhere he went. I love the gospel that came from the Jews to us, and I want to go back to them and say how much I love the gospel. Thank God for the gospel. It's at stake. And Paul wanted more than anything to highlight the value of the gospel. Number 2. The second reason why this trip is so important is Christian commitment to the poor. He's taken an offering for the poor, he says. He takes it himself. Doesn't send Barnabas or Silas with it. And it cost him a lot. They beat him. They threw him in jail. They kept him in jail for 2 years. And as he sat there, I'm sure he wondered, I could be in Spain. And I brought the money myself. I don't think he regretted it. Do you remember what Peter said to Paul? Now, Peter, James, and John are the pillars of the Jerusalem church. That's what they're called in Galatians 2. Pillars of the Jerusalem church. And Paul went down and had a big powwow. And he had this powwow because if his gospel and their gospel are not the same gospel, there's no gospel. The Gentile mission is over, the church is over if the apostles can't get their act together. And so this is a huge meeting. And they got their act together. And Peter blessed Paul, and the last thing he said to him, 2:10, Galatians 2:10, don't forget the poor. Let me read the whole thing. They gave the right hand of fellowship to Barnabas and me, that we should go to the Gentiles and they to the circumcised. So it's okay that, Paul, you're the apostle to the Gentiles, we're the apostles to the Jews. It's okay to divide up the labor like that. Only they asked us to remember the poor. And then Paul adds, the very thing I was eager to do. Nobody had to twist Paul's arm to love the poor, he said. You want me to do that, Peter? I'm not sure I want to do it, but since you want me to do it, I'll do it. That's not what he said. What he said was, you want me to do it? Good. I'm already eager to do it. This is not arm twisting to get me to go to the poor in Jerusalem. When he comes to the end of Galatians in chapter 6, verse 10, he writes this, so then, as we have opportunity, let us do good to everyone, and especially to those who are of the household of faith. Do you hear the both and there? Don't be forced into artificial either-ors by people who say, do Christians care about their own or they care about unbelievers? Don't be forced into that kind of dilemma. Paul would never let himself be trapped like that. He said, do good to all people. And then he said, especially. It's like a dad. Dad ought to care about the kids in the neighborhood, and especially his own kids. It's not either or. Don't be forced into an either or thing when it comes to ministry in that way. And so my concluding rhetorical exhortation question to Bethlehem is, how are we doing in our hearts first, and then in our work and our strategies for the poorest of the poor and the local poorer? How are we doing? Number 3. The unity of the church across ethnic lines appears to Paul to be huge, especially Jew and Gentile. Now here we are at verse 27, and it's a very provocative and strange verse. It's the one that caused me most difficulty in thinking and preparing. So let's read it. They, that is, the Gentile believers in Macedonia and Achaia, they were pleased to do it. That is, to take up a collection for the poor saints in Jerusalem. They were pleased to do it, and indeed, they owe it to them. That is, to the poor Jewish Christian saints in Jerusalem. They owe it to them. And then he gives the reason for why they owe it to them. For if the Gentiles have come to share in their Jewish spiritual blessings, then they, those Gentiles, ought to also be of service to them, those Jewish Christians, in material blessings. Now, what's so provocative about that to me is Paul could have motivated this giving much more simply than that. He could have said, love people, love the poor of any kind. And he entangles himself in this Jew-Gentile issue. Again. This is Romans 11 all over again. This is Romans 11 all over again. He can't get away from Romans 11. Do you remember Romans 11? And Paul is cutting the nerve of Jewish pride and Gentile pride, Jewish boasting and Gentile boasting, by showing how God did this complex redemptive history in order to cut pride out from under everybody's feet. And the way he did it was to say, don't you Gentiles dare boast over the Jewish branches that are broken off. Because you are Johnny-come-lately branches. You're a wild olive tree. And you were grafted by pure grace into this olive tree. You were grafted by pure grace into this olive tree. You know what that olive tree is? That's the covenant with Abraham and Israel. The promises made to Israel. There. So, if you have any spiritual blessings at all, you Gentiles, you know where you got them? From Jews. What did Jesus say in John 4? Salvation is from the Jews. So don't boast. And Jews in Jerusalem, don't boast either. Because guess what? Your pride and your inheritance, that you are the children of Abraham, and that you're the beneficiaries of the promises, guess what? The Messiah is giving them away freely to anybody who wants them of every color and ethnicity. So don't you boast over the Gentiles like you got the inheritance. Because your Messiah is going before you among all the nations and gathering them into Judaism. If you're a Christian, you're a Jew. That's what Paul would say. And if you're a Jew, you're an heir of Abraham and inherit the world. So it appears that he's saying, I want to make sure in this trip that both Jew and Gentile discover and realize how interwoven their lives are. How interwoven they are in the one blessing of God, the one covenant of God. They're not two peoples of God, Jewish people, Christian people. There aren't two ways to heaven, Jewish covenant, Christian covenant. That two-covenant theology is damnable. There's one. And Paul, in order to make it crystal clear as the apostle to the Gentiles, is going 1,000 miles away from Spain to Jews. I have not forgotten my own. I have not forgotten where I've come from. I have not forgotten where my gospel originated. I have not forgotten that this people is one people, Jew and Gentile, or we're no